Do not start your car. A single mom screamed as the Mafia boss froze when he realized the truth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. Sarah Lawson's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the steering wheel of her old sedan. She had never expected her day to end like this. The rain poured down in sheets, the windshield wipers working overtime, trying to keep up with the heavy downpour. As she navigated the narrow street, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread, a knot in her stomach that had been growing ever since she left her office earlier that day. She was a single mom, a speech therapist by profession, but today had been a particularly exhausting one. She was just trying to make it home, to the small apartment she shared with her son, where she could relax and maybe forget about the weight of her responsibilities for just a few hours. But fate had other plans. As she approached the intersection, Sarah noticed a black SUV ahead of her, stopped at the traffic light. Her tired eyes barely had time to register the vehicle before her car started acting up. It sputtered, and before she could react, the engine stalled. Panic gripped her chest. She twisted the key in the ignition, praying the engine would restart. But nothing. She was stuck in the middle of the street, and the worst part? The SUV in front of her wasn't just any ordinary vehicle. No, this one was too sleek, too powerful, too intimidating. The headlights illuminated her rearview mirror, and for a split second, Sarah felt the weight of someone's gaze bearing down on her. That was when she heard the voice. Do not start your car. It was low, commanding, and as cold as the rain outside. Sarah froze. The voice didn't belong to just anyone. She looked up to see a tall man in a black suit, his silhouette cutting through the rain like a shadow. His presence was overwhelming, and Sarah knew instantly that he was no ordinary man. Her eyes widened as he stepped closer, the sound of his shoes against the wet pavement growing louder with each step. Who are you? Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. The man didn't respond right away. He was studying her, his gaze cold and calculating. Then, in a flash, he was there, standing right next to her car, looking down at her through the window. You're lucky I'm in a good mood today, he said, his voice softer but still tinged with authority. But next time, don't make the mistake of getting in my way. Sarah's heart raced as he turned and walked back toward the SUV, the sound of his footsteps fading into the storm. She didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was certain. She had just crossed paths with someone dangerous. Someone who had the power to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. As she sat there, staring at the spot where he had stood just moments ago, Sarah felt the weight of the truth settle into her bones. She was no longer in control of her own life. Not anymore. Sarah sat frozen in her car, the engine dead, and the rain pounding relentlessly against the windshield. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her fingers numb from the cold and the fear that had taken root in her chest. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, the man who had appeared out of nowhere, his presence so commanding that it had stopped her heart for a moment. Who was he? Why had he told her not to start her car? What was happening? She tried to shake off the unease that had settled over her, but it clung to her like a heavy fog. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath, attempting to calm her racing mind. She twisted the key in the ignition once again, praying that her car would come back to life. But again, nothing. The engine remained silent. Panic began to creep in, but she forced herself to think. She had to get out of here. She couldn't stay in this car, stranded in the middle of nowhere. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, breaking her train of thought. She grabbed it quickly, seeing that it was a message from her best friend, Carmen. Asterisk, are you okay? Just heard about the accident on 5th Street. Are you on your way home? Asterisk, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Accident? What accident? She didn't have time to think about it, though. She needed to focus. She quickly typed a reply. Asterisk. I'm fine. Just stuck. Car won't start. I'll figure it out. Asterisk, as she hit send, she noticed something. The black SUV was still there, parked just ahead of her, the man nowhere in sight. Sarah's nerves were frayed, but she knew she had to do something. She could call for help, but would anyone even be able to reach her in time? The streets were deserted, the rain making everything feel more isolated. She opened the car door cautiously, stepping out into the pouring rain. The cold hit her immediately, but she didn't care. She needed to move. She had to find out where the man had gone. She walked cautiously toward the SUV, keeping her eyes on the spot where he had stood just moments ago. There was no sign of him. No movement. Nothing. For a moment, she thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. Maybe she had imagined the whole thing. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. He was standing by the corner of the street, watching her with those piercing eyes. The same eyes that had made her freeze earlier. He didn't move, but she could feel the weight of his stare. Asterisk, are you lost? Asterisk, he asked, his voice calm, yet somehow filled with authority. Sarah froze. She didn't know how to answer. He hadn't touched her, hadn't threatened her, but the power that radiated from him made her feel like she was the one who was trapped. She swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. I'm just trying to get home, she managed to say, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. He took a step toward her, his presence suddenly overwhelming. You should be more careful, he said softly, his words carrying a weight that sent a shiver down her spine. He paused for a moment, as if considering something, before adding, asterisk, there are people who wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of someone like you. Asterisk, his words hit her like a ton of bricks. What did he mean by that? Who was he really? And why was he talking to her like this? Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. She had to get out of here. She had to leave before things went any further. She turned on her heel, ready to head back to her car when she heard his voice again. Asterisk, stay with me. Asterisk, she stopped, her body tensing. His voice wasn't demanding, but there was something about it that made her hesitate. She didn't know what he wanted from her, but in that moment, she realized something. She was scared. Scared of him. Scared of the situation. Scared of how easily she had gotten swept up in all of this. She was a mother, she had responsibilities, and she couldn't afford to get caught up in the mess of someone else's world. But even as those thoughts raced through her mind, she couldn't bring herself to turn around. Something about him made her want to stay. Something she couldn't explain. As he took a step closer, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. He was a stranger. A dangerous one at that. But the question remained, what did he want with her? Sarah turned slowly, feeling the weight of Vincent's presence behind her. His eyes, dark and intense, followed every movement she made. She could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. She hesitated for a moment, then turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. I need to get home, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to sound strong, but the fear she had been holding back was creeping into her words. Vincent's gaze softened for a split second, but the steel in his eyes was still there. You can't go back, he said calmly. Not yet. Sarah's mind raced. What did he mean by that? What was he trying to do? She looked around, trying to find an escape, but the street was empty. No cars, no people, just the relentless rain pouring down on the pavement. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I'm not part of your world. Vincent took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. He didn't touch her, but the space between them seemed to shrink with every passing second. Maybe you're not yet, he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. But you will. Be. Sarah took a step back, her mind spinning. She had no idea what he was talking about, but every fiber of her being told her to stay away. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I just want to go home to my son. Vincent's expression flickered, just for a moment, but then he looked at her with those piercing eyes. Your son will be fine, he said. I won't hurt him, but I can't let you go. Sarah's heart raced. Why? She demanded, her fear giving way to frustration. Why are you doing this? He looked at her for a long moment, as if considering his words. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he answered, because you've seen something. You've heard something you shouldn't have. Sarah's stomach churned. What did he mean? What had she overheard? She didn't remember anything important, just a conversation that had felt out of place. Vincent seemed to sense her confusion. It's not just what you heard, he said, his tone shifting. It's who you are. You're connected to something much bigger than you realize. Sarah felt a cold chill run through her. She didn't understand, but she felt it in her bones. She had to get away from him. She had to protect her son, even if it meant running from whatever dark world Vincent had pulled her into. She took another step back, but Vincent's eyes never left her. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "This is bigger than you." "I don't care," Sarah replied, her voice more confident now. "I'll figure it out on my own." She turned to leave, but before she could take a single step, Vincent's hand shot out, grabbing her arm with surprising force. She gasped in shock, her heart racing as he pulled her back toward him. "You don't get to walk away," he said, his voice now tinged with a dangerous edge. "Not from me. Not from this." Sarah struggled to break free, but his grip was firm, unyielding. She could feel the power in his hold, and for a moment, she wondered if she was in over her head. "Let go of me," she shouted, her voice full of panic. "I don't belong in your world." Vincent's eyes softened for a brief moment, and he released her arm. "You already are," he said quietly, "and there's no turning back." Sarah stumbled back, her breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. She didn't know what to do, didn't know where to turn. She wanted to run, but where could she go? Vincent stepped back, giving her space. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his voice calm again, but with an undercurrent of something far darker. "And when you do, you'll realize why you can't leave." Sarah stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how to escape this. She didn't know how to escape him. But as she looked at Vincent, something in his eyes made her realize that she was already too far gone. There was no way out. Not anymore. Sarah could still feel the weight of Vincent's words hanging in the air, his presence lingering like an unspoken threat. She had never felt so trapped in her life, caught in a world she didn't understand, with a man who seemed to control everything. As she stood there, staring at him, she realized that every instinct she had been ignoring for the past few moments was screaming at her to leave. But where could she go? And how could she escape him? "I told you," Vincent said, his voice softer now, but still holding that quiet authority that made her heart race. "You can't leave." She tried to shake off the fear that was creeping up her spine, but it was no use. There was something about him, something dangerous, that made her feel like she was powerless, like no matter what she did, she was already bound to him. "I don't belong in your world," she said again, this time with more conviction, though the words felt hollow coming from her mouth. Vincent didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her, his dark eyes searching her face like he was reading her soul. Sarah wanted to look away, to run, but she couldn't. His gaze held her, and she felt like she was drowning in it. "You don't think you belong," he said finally, his voice low and almost contemplative. "But you're already part of it, whether you realize it or not." The words stung, but she refused to let him see how much they affected her. She couldn't let him control her, couldn't let him win. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I'm not going to let you intimidate me." Vincent's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're not afraid," he said, taking a step closer to her. "But fear isn't always obvious. Sometimes, it's something you don't even realize is there, until it's too late." Sarah stood her ground, even as every part of her wanted to run. She didn't understand him. She didn't understand why he was doing this, why he was so determined to keep her in his world. But she couldn't back down. She had to stay strong, for her son, for herself. "I don't need you," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. "I'll find a way out of this." Vincent didn't flinch. "You might think you can," he said, his voice quieter now, "but you won't. Not when you realize what you're truly dealing with." He turned then, as if he had said everything he needed to, as if the conversation was over. Sarah stood there, frozen, her thoughts racing. What was she truly dealing with? And how much danger was she in? The question lingered in the back of her mind as she watched him walk away, his steps purposeful and calm. She wanted to follow him, to demand answers, but something inside her told her to wait, to give it time. "You'll see." Vincent's voice drifted back to her, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. "You'll see what I mean soon enough." And with that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Sarah standing in the rain, feeling more lost than ever before. She wanted to shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping up on her, but deep down, she knew he was right about one thing. There was no way out of this. Not now. Not anymore. The days that followed were a blur for Sarah. The rain had stopped, but the unease that had settled in her chest only grew stronger with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent was always just one step behind her, his presence lingering like a shadow. Every time she went out, She felt eyes on her, though no one ever seemed to be there. The world around her continued as it always had, but she couldn't escape the weight of the reality she had found herself in. She tried to focus on her son, Lucas, the only reason she had to keep going. But even as she watched him play, the innocent smile on his face didn't reach her. The knowledge that her life had been irrevocably changed was like a stone in her gut, heavy and unrelenting. She couldn't go back to the life she had before Vincent had entered it. She didn't know what he wanted from her, why he was so determined to pull her into his world. But every time she tried to forget, to live her life as she once had, his voice echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you'll see. Asterisk, the words had haunted her since the moment he had spoken them. There was something about the way he said it, something ominous, as though he knew something she didn't. She didn't know what he saw in her, but she could no longer deny that he had control over her life. She had tried to ignore the feeling, to go about her daily routine, but the truth was inescapable. Vincent wasn't just a man. He was part of a world she didn't belong to, a world that was now a part of her whether she liked it or not. She had spent the past few days trying to come up with a plan. She considered going to the authorities, but the fear that had gripped her when she first saw Vincent hadn't faded. She couldn't risk putting herself and Lucas in even more danger. Her only option, she realized, was to keep her distance, to avoid Vincent as much as possible. But that wasn't as easy as it sounded. Every day, she felt him watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had tried to be brave, to stand her ground, but each encounter with him left her feeling more powerless. She needed to be strong, for Lucas's sake. But how could she protect him when she couldn't protect herself? That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of a knock at the door startled her. She had been expecting this, in a way, though she hadn't known when it would come. She stood up slowly, her heart racing as she approached the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle, but when she opened it, there was no one there. Just a small envelope, left on the doorstep. She picked it up, her fingers lingering on the edges as she stared at the handwriting. It was elegant, precise. She knew instantly who it was from. The note inside was short, simple. Asterisk, you're running out of time. Asterisk, she crumpled the paper in her hand, frustration and fear rising within her. Vincent's words echoed in her mind again. Asterisk, you'll see. Asterisk, she didn't know what to do anymore. Every step she took, every decision she made, seemed to bring her closer to him, and further from the life she had once known. She had no choice but to face him, to confront whatever it was he wanted from her. But the truth was, she didn't know if she was ready to face the consequences of that decision. The only thing she was certain of now was that her world would never be the same. And as much as she wanted to walk away, she knew deep down that she couldn't. Not anymore. The next morning, Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. She stared out the window, watching the world go by, but her mind was far from the peaceful scene outside. The envelope, the note, Vincent's words, they all weighed on her, pressing down on her chest like an invisible hand. Asterisk, you're running out of time. Asterisk, the words echoed in her mind, every syllable haunting her, reminding her that she was caught in something far bigger than she could handle. She had no idea what Vincent wanted from her, but she knew she couldn't run from it anymore. She had to face him. She had to figure out what it all meant, for her sake and for Lucas's. The thought of getting involved in his world made her sick to her stomach, but there was no escaping it now. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. She picked it up without thinking, her fingers trembling as she saw Carmen's name on the screen. Asterisk. Hey, Sarah, I know you're busy, but we need to talk. Call me when you get a chance. Asterisk. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Carmen was her closest friend, someone she trusted completely. If she needed to talk to her about something, it had to be important. Sarah quickly dialed Carmen's number, trying to calm the nerves that were beginning to take over again. Hey, Sarah said when Carmen picked up. What's going on? Sarah. Carmen's voice was urgent, filled with worry. I've been hearing things. People are asking about you. About your situation. Vincent Romano's name came up. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. What do you mean? She asked, trying to sound calm. What are they saying? Carmen hesitated before answering. People are nervous. There's talk that you're involved with him, that you know too much. You need to be careful, Sarah. If this is what I think it is, You're in way over your head. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Vincent wasn't just some random man in her life. He was a part of something dangerous, something bigger than she could ever understand. I don't know what to do, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't just walk away from this. Carmen was silent for a moment before she spoke again. I know, but you can't do this alone. You need help, and you need to get out of that world. Fast. Sarah wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that she could somehow escape, but she knew the truth. Vincent had already made it clear, she wasn't going anywhere. Not unless he allowed it. I don't know if I can, Sarah said quietly, her voice tinged with defeat. But I'm going to try. Just be careful, Carmen warned. Promise me you'll be careful. I will, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. She hung up the phone and sat there, staring at the screen. The weight of everything she had been trying to avoid came crashing down on her. She had no choice now. She had to confront Vincent. She couldn't live in fear forever. She had to face him, find out what he wanted, and figure out what her next move would be. The fear in her heart was still there, gnawing at her, but she couldn't let it control her. Not anymore. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Her life had changed the moment she had crossed paths with Vincent, and there was no turning back. But maybe, just maybe, she could take control of what happened next. She couldn't keep running. Not when her son's future depended on her standing up for herself. She took one last look at the apartment before stepping out into the cold, rainy morning. The storm hadn't passed, but Sarah was determined to face whatever came her way. She didn't know what was waiting for her, but she was ready to find out. Sarah walked briskly through the rain, her shoes splashing against the wet pavement as the storm raged on. The familiar sound of her footsteps echoed in her ears, but everything else felt unfamiliar, as if she were walking through a different world. Her heart raced, her mind replaying everything Vincent had said to her, the way he had looked at her, as if he already knew the truth about her. She had never felt more exposed in her life. She was a mother, a woman trying to make a living, but now she was tangled up in something far beyond her comprehension. Every step she took felt heavier, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her chest. She couldn't help but wonder how she had gotten here. A few days ago, she had been an ordinary woman, just trying to survive. Now, she was being pulled into a world she didn't belong in, a world ruled by someone who had the power to change everything. She reached the corner of the block and stopped. She didn't know where to go. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave, but she had nowhere to go. And running from Vincent would only bring more danger. She had to face him. The thought terrified her, but she had no choice. She couldn't stay hidden forever. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs as she forced herself to move forward. She had made a decision. She would find Vincent and make him tell her what he wanted, what this was all about. The questions had been swirling in her mind ever since their last encounter. Why was he doing this? Why was he interested in her? She didn't know the answers, but she was determined to find out. She couldn't let him control her, couldn't let him manipulate her life any longer. She had to take control, even if it meant stepping into a world of danger. She turned onto the next street, her mind focused on the task ahead. But then, a car pulled up beside her, the headlights blinding her for a moment. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. The window rolled down slowly, and there he was. Vincent. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Get in, he said, his voice calm, but with an undeniable authority behind it. Sarah hesitated. She should have walked away, turned around, and kept going, but she couldn't. Something inside her told her that this moment would determine everything. I'm not getting in your car, she said, her voice steady, though she felt the fear rising in her chest. Vincent's gaze didn't waver. You don't have a choice, he said quietly. You're already involved. His words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She opened her mouth to protest, but he spoke again, his tone gentler this time. I'm not going to hurt you, Sarah, but I need you to understand that this isn't something you can walk away from. Sarah's mind raced. She didn't know if she could trust him, but at that moment, she felt like she had no other option. With a deep breath, she opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The moment the door clicked shut, the car pulled away from the curb, the city lights flickering outside the window. Vincent didn't say anything as they drove through the dark streets. Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead, Her hands clenched in her lap, fighting the overwhelming urge to speak. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable, until Vincent finally broke it. "I'm not your enemy, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "But you need to trust me if you want to survive." The words hung in the air like a promise, but Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to believe them. She didn't know where this was leading, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed forever, and there was no going back. The car rolled to a stop in front of an imposing building, the lights of the city reflected in the sleek black exterior of Vincent's car. Sarah glanced out the window, feeling a sense of unease wash over her as she took in her surroundings. She had no idea where they were, but it was clear this wasn't just some random place. This was Vincent's world. She could feel the weight of that truth settling in as the engine died, the silence in the car now deafening. "This is where it all changes." Vincent's voice broke the silence, and Sarah turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. Vincent's gaze softened for a moment, but there was still that underlying tension in his expression. "I told you, you're already involved," he said, his voice quieter now, more serious. "Whether you want to be or not." Sarah swallowed hard, the words echoing in her mind. She had never wanted any part of this, never imagined that her life would take such a drastic turn. But now, here she was, trapped in a world of power, secrets, and danger. Vincent was right. She couldn't walk away. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper, the fear in her chest rising once again. Vincent looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I need your help," he said simply. "But not in the way you think." Sarah's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Help with what?" "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for," Vincent said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I need someone who can help me with the situation I'm dealing with. Someone who can think for themselves, someone who won't back down." Sarah didn't know what to make of his words. The weight of his gaze seemed to be measuring her, evaluating her in a way that made her feel like an object, something to be used. She didn't like it. "I'm not your pawn," she said, her voice firmer now, though she couldn't ignore the shakiness still lingering in her chest. Vincent didn't seem to be offended. If anything, he seemed impressed. "I never said you were," he replied. "But you're already in this, whether you like it or not. And I need someone I can trust." Sarah felt a surge of frustration. "Why me? Why not someone else?" Vincent's expression remained unchanged. "Because you're the only one who has what I need." He paused for a moment, as if considering something. "And because you're already in my world, whether you realize it or not." Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. She didn't know what this situation was that Vincent was referring to, but she was beginning to get the sense that it was much bigger than she could comprehend. "I'm not getting involved in whatever this is," she said, shaking her head. "I'm done." "You're already involved," Vincent replied, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have a choice, Sarah. This is bigger than you and me. You'll see soon enough." The words hit her hard, a sinking feeling forming in her stomach. "You're not giving me a choice," she said, more to herself than to him. Vincent gave her a knowing look, his eyes unwavering. "You never had one," he said quietly, his tone final. Sarah didn't know how to respond. The air between them was thick with tension, and she could feel herself becoming more and more entangled in Vincent's world with every passing moment. She had no idea what he wanted from her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. She was in deeper than she had ever imagined, and the question was no longer if she would get out, but when, and at what cost. Vincent opened the car door and stepped out, turning to face Sarah as she stayed in the car. "Are you coming in?" he asked, his voice casual, but with an undercurrent of expectation. Sarah hesitated. She wanted to refuse, to walk away, but something inside her told her she couldn't. She had already stepped too far into his world, and the only way out was to face it head on. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and stepped out of the car. As she walked toward the building, the sound of her footsteps was the only thing that seemed to matter. She didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain. She was already too far gone, and there was no turning back. Sarah followed Vincent through the grand entrance of the building, the sound of her heels echoing in the marble-floored lobby. The air felt different here, thicker, charged with an energy she couldn't place. Every step she took felt heavier, like the weight of her decisions was pressing down on her. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. Vincent led her down a long hallway, his stride confident, his presence commanding the space around him. The walls were lined with expensive artwork, the kind that made Sarah feel out of place. She had never been in a place like this before. They stopped in front of a set of large, ornate doors. Vincent turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is where it starts," he said, his voice calm but firm. Sarah swallowed hard, her heart racing. She didn't know what he meant by that, but she didn't have time to ask. The doors opened, and they stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of lamps casting shadows on the walls. At the far end of the room, a large desk sat beneath a window that overlooked the city. Behind it stood a man, tall, with sharp features and an air of authority that made him seem untouchable. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. Vincent walked ahead, and Sarah followed, trying to steady her nerves. The man behind the desk stood as they approached. "Vincent," he said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "Is this her?" Vincent nodded. "Yes, this is Sarah." The man's gaze shifted to Sarah, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I hope you're as capable as they say." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She wanted to tell him she didn't belong here, that she had no idea what she was doing, but she bit her tongue. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew she couldn't back down. Vincent stepped forward, placing a hand on the man's desk. "She's the one," he said. "She's the only one who can help us with this." The man's eyes flickered briefly to Vincent, then back to Sarah. "I don't like surprises," he said, his tone icy. "But I trust you, Vincent. You've never been wrong before." Sarah felt a chill run through her. Whatever this was, it was bigger than she had imagined. She had no idea what they were talking about, what role she was supposed to play, but the sense of power in the room made her feel small. The man behind the desk stepped toward her. "You don't belong here, you know," he said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were trying to convince her of something. "You're in over your head." Sarah met his gaze, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't have a choice," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I didn't ask for any of this, but I'm already here." The man smirked, almost as if he were amused by her response. "You'll learn quickly," he said, "and soon, you'll understand why we do what we do." Vincent's eyes flickered toward Sarah. "She'll learn," he said quietly. "But she's smart. She'll adapt." The man didn't say anything for a moment, just watched Sarah with an unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't trust easily," he said, his voice low. "But if Vincent trusts you, I'll give you a chance. Prove yourself." Sarah didn't know what he meant by that, but she wasn't about to show weakness. She had to prove herself, if only to keep her son safe, to keep herself from being swallowed whole by this world. She didn't have the luxury of fear anymore. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, the words coming out more firmly than she expected. The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll see," he said, turning away. "We'll see what you're made of." Sarah stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure. She had just taken the first step into a world she might never be able to leave. And there was no turning back now.